March 13th, 1995. Filmmakers gathered at a conference in Paris to celebrate the 100th year of cinema and contemplate its next century. As the audience prepared to listen to a guest speaker, they instead were thrown bright red pamphlets printed with a manifesto. The supreme task of the decadent filmmakers is to fool the audience. Is that what we are so proud of? Is that what 100 years have brought us? Illusions via which emotions can be communicated? The illusions are everything the movie can hide behind. Dogma 95 counters the film of illusion by the presentation of an indisputable set of rules known as the Vow of Chastity. The director was Lars von Trier. He, along with Thomas Vinterberg, outlined a new movement in cinema. In response to the growing prevalence of special effects, technical trickery, and post-production magic, Dogma 95 sought to bring the focus of movies back to their core elements: the story and performances. Dogma 95 featured 10 rules, not unlike the 10 Commandments. Shooting must be done on location, the sound must never be produced apart from the images, and vice versa, which rules out a musical score. The camera must be handheld, special lighting is not acceptable. As you can probably imagine, a lot of the attendees weren't too keen on the idea. Sets and props and lights and sound design and music are bad, actually? What are you talking about? 3 years later, the first Dogma 95 film was released, Festen, or The Celebration. Directed by Thomas Vinterberg, the film follows a family gathering that goes about as well as they normally do. The film is ugly and rough around the edges. The handheld camera gives everything an extra jolt of energy. The result is this raw, unapologetic film where nothing gets in the way of its story and performances. There's nothing for the film to hide behind. By rejecting many of the things that make film a compelling medium, Vinterberg was able to create a film unlike any other. According to the Dogma 95 manifesto, there's no sense in dressing up a story in full regalia. January 21st, 2025. Game developers gathered at a conference in Toronto to discuss their craft. As the audience prepared to listen to a guest speaker, they instead received a strange directive.
I wanna kill gameplay.
This is Droqen, one of the most singular voices in the gaming space. Droqen makes small, experimental games that challenge the conceptions of what games can be. The lo-fi aesthetics pair with opaque objectives to give the player an experience most games don't offer, or can't offer.
Years later, I was making a platformer called Awake. It's very small. I was thinking about when I'm going to bed, I have to turn off the light. The light switch is here, my bed's there. I just sort of memorize the space, and I turn off the light, and I'm like, it's dark, I can't see anything, and I still have to make my way to bed. It's a little platformer. You jump around, there's a light switch, and then it's all black, and you just have to make a few jumps. It's a very small number of jumps, but it's impossible. It's very hard. And I made this game. It was one level, it was one nice level, and I showed it to some people, and one person said, hey, I like that game. I want a level 2. And I was just like, I'm like, no, there's no level 2. Because the second level would just be the same thing. It would just be regurgitated. I'm like, I could do it, right? But it's not necessary. It wasn't necessary at all. And it would have been, like gameplay for the sake of gameplay.
Droqen is the flag bearer for the kill gameplay design philosophy. According to kill gameplay, extraneous friction gets in the way of what a work is attempting to say. Levels for the sake of levels, complexity for the sake of complexity, difficulty for the sake of difficulty. All of this extra gameplay gets in the way of what a work can potentially say. Kill it. When I first discovered Droqen and kill gameplay, I bristled at the idea. Exploring how gameplay can be used to tell stories and communicate ideas is kind of my whole thing. I'm sure I felt like the filmmakers who were bombarded by Dogma 95 pamphlets.
I assume that a lot of you in this room have experienced this. I'll make a system, and I'll engage with the system, and I'll fail, and I'm like, I want to do better. And I think that's all bad. But I understand it, and I did it for years, decades.
Kill gameplay wrestles with conventions that have been commonplace in games since the very beginning. Why do so many of them implement negative reinforcement? Why do we engage with systems that have no tangible reward? Why is gameplay so addictive? What kill gameplay means exactly is kinda hard to define. Not because the concepts are overly complex, but because the writings and talks about the ideology are scattered in various places. Website updates, forum threads, YouTube comments, they're all over the place. That was until May of 2025 with the release of The End of Gameplay. It is the closest thing kill gameplay has to a manifesto. Instead of a list of rules, the end of gameplay features a collection of ruminations on what it means to have games in a world without gameplay. It is one of the most fascinating things I have ever played. The end of gameplay is a collection of short vignettes. Most of them feature a bunny character, a cluster of 100 pixels with an opaque teal background. The bunny runs and jumps and climbs and explores these abstract environments. Esoteric text greets them every step of the way. As the intro level says, jump, read, and explore the world until you win. Smiley face. These aren't levels really, though they kind of are. They're not mini-games or challenges or set pieces. They're poems. They use the language of a 2D platformer to make the player contemplate some aspect of the nebulous concept of gameplay. The first poem, called Bunnies, states that we are all bunnies born into a world of coins and walls. Colliding with a coin will make it disappear. Naturally, I wanted to collect them all, but the coins served no purpose. There was no score, no shop to spend the money at, just a sound and the knowledge that fewer yellow ovals littered the screen. I had instinctively collected all of the coins, and the game interrogated that instinct. This is the mentality the end of gameplay operates in. It presents scenarios commonly seen in games and holds a mirror to them. It questions the nature of the medium it exists within. Your mileage for this sort of thing may vary. Art that deconstructs the concept of art has a tendency to seem dismissive, or be dismissed itself. The price of admission for the end of gameplay wards off anyone who isn't absolutely down with its mantra. The title itself feels aggressive. The blocky presentation isn't always pleasing to look at. What little promotional materials there are don't do an especially good job at communicating what this game is, because it's hard to define what exactly it is. Not to mention the literal price of admission is $20, and it never goes on sale. To engage with the end of gameplay, the audience has to stroll past several bright warning signs that scream, "Are you sure this is for you?" If it is, in fact, for you, then the end of gameplay will take you on a journey through gameplay's end times. Each poem uses the same verbs. The bunny, or some other character, moves and jumps. But the escape key is also important. At any time, the player can leave the current scene and go back to the menu. This too is incorporated into the messaging. One of the early poems, Oubliette, is titled after a dungeon with no means of escape. Derived from the French word for forget, those who found themselves in an oubliette were meant to be cast out from the world, never to be seen again. The bunny finds themselves in such a dungeon. They jump, climb the walls, but they cannot leave. Each surface is solid, the ceiling is too high to reach. There is no way out. Except there is. Hit escape. Move on to the next poem. The end of gameplay calls attention to aspects of games we take for granted. Are we really meant to just rot in the bottom of a cell forever? Aren't we supposed to get all the coins? Some kids gather in a backyard and kick a ball around. They pass it between themselves and try to kick it as hard as they can. This is freeform play. No defined goals, no inhibitions. If those same kids suddenly divided into teams and tried to kick a ball into each other's goal, they're playing a game. It will be up to the players to keep the score and enforce the rules. The players might agree on what the rules are, but they might not always follow them. Now, put those kids in different colored jerseys on a regulation-sized field and add a referee. This time the rules are more solidified, and it's up to a third party to make sure the game is played accurately. An authority on the field enforces the rules. In all of these scenarios, the game of soccer, or football, is being played. The difference is how strictly the rules of the game are being enforced. If a kid picks up and throws the ball when they're just messing around in the backyard, it's no big deal. If someone does that in the World Cup final? Man, could you imagine? In order for the game to be played properly, there needs to be some contract in place to ensure that the rules are being followed. This is the job of the referee. This could be the players holding each other accountable, or it could be a literal referee. But the referee is what separates playing from playing a game. For comparison, some friends improvising would be completely freeform. Playing a competitive board game involves the participants holding each other accountable for the rules. A game such as Dungeons & Dragons gives one player more authority over the others, effectively making them the referee. By their very nature, video games need a referee. Each game is hard-coded to behave a certain way. Its rules will be enforced. If someone hasn't programmed pick up the ball and throw it over the fence, it's not possible. The existence of a referee implies the existence of rules, and the existence of rules implies the existence of goals and objectives. Remove a referee from a soccer game and you can still kick a ball around. Remove the referee from a video game and the whole thing falls apart. So we've come to a bit of an impasse. A video game needs a referee in some capacity, but if goals, objectives, scores, and fail states get removed, what is there for a referee to do? How do we actually go about killing gameplay? The end of gameplay has a few scenarios that try to present a kids playing in the backyard experience within the confines of a World Cup medium. One poem, Downstream, places the bunny at the foot of a waterfall. To make it to the top of the screen, presumably to the source of the water, the player performs a series of precarious jumps. The second screen speaks of drowning. The path upwards is even more convoluted. The bunny keeps climbing and climbing. On the penultimate screen, we're asked, what if there is no source and the water never stops falling? On the next screen, the bunny doesn't appear. They're lost in the water. Maybe they've drowned, but the water keeps falling and falling and falling. We were warned, and yet we kept climbing. Another poem, Dream of the Only Flower, gives the player control over a little insect guy. The words sweet freedom sit in the corner, and the little bug dude can jump and fly to his heart's content. The left and right exits loop to one another, so the only way is up. But flying up is strange. The platforms are way too tiny for comfort. It took me several tries to climb up the series of screens. I failed and I wanted to do better, but I got there. I made it to the top of the flower and took one final leap into an ocean of pink. The Tower series expresses this idea more explicitly. The bunny starts on the ground floor. At the top of the tower, anyone's wish can be granted. Or maybe there's nothing. There's only one way to know for sure. After reaching the 8th floor, the poem ends. Tower 10 continues the story. The bunny climbs and then reaches this screen. The door is up top. These ledges look like they can be grabbed onto, but there's no way to reach it. I tried for several minutes jumping up the wall, timing the jumps differently, checking every corner to see if I missed anything, only to find nothing. The only way forward is to hit escape, to leave, to not see what the top of the tower holds. But Tower 20 drops the bunny on the 20th floor, where the room is incomplete. The bunny falls to the previous floor into a void. Tower 30 skips the player to the ending. The bunny is at the top of the tower. There's a door that can't be entered, clouds paint the sky, but no wishes get granted. Why do we climb when there is no reward? Why do we engage with systems that disorient, that frustrate, that may or may not be complete, when there is nothing to get out of it? Ironically, these sequences engage with the systems they critique. While I could have just noped out of any of them, I still got some enjoyment out of the platforming gauntlets. Downstream felt like cracking a traversal puzzle. Dream of the Only Flower was like a truncated Bennett Foddy game. Tower was fun until it became impossible to finish. At no point did the game give me an objective. Flying to the top of the flower was something I decided to do, but at the same time, it's the only thing I was really able to do. The poem juxtaposes the freedom of movement and the lack of a goal with a literal goal. Making it to the top of the flower will end the poem. There is an end goal, even if it isn't stated. Even in Tower 10, where hitting escape is the only option, it still has a defined ending. The player eventually realizes that they're in a room without an exit, so they hit a key literally called escape. Even though it's not an end state usually seen in games, it's still there. The end of gameplay wrestles with these issues but doesn't quite conquer them. These poems have mechanics, friction, and end states. It communicates its ideas through both its text and how the player interacts with the controllable avatars. For as much as it obscures its gameplay is still alive and well. Perhaps I'm being a touch too literal with it though. I've been looking at the end of gameplay in a vacuum, but its ideas aren't meant to be exclusive to this one title. How do the ideas presented in this manifesto apply to other, unrelated games? I enjoyed Silent Hill F quite a bit. It's an abstract horror story about a lot of things. Gender roles, family, the loss of self, envy, and the desire to break free clashing against the desire for things to remain how they've always been. Hinako, the main character, is a conflicted person. Her backstory unfolds in that classic Silent Hill fashion. It's a multifaceted story and one of the most nuanced, mature tales the franchise has ever tackled. Silent Hill F is also about smacking sentient mannequins with a pipe. The game features slow, weighty combat, the kind you would normally find in a modern-day action RPG. Each of the weapons have a different speed. The sickle is fast though brittle, whereas the sledgehammer is powerful but slow, leaving Hinako vulnerable for a few seconds. The weapons have their own durability to keep track of too. Fixing them is possible with a toolkit, which takes up a precious inventory slot that could be used for healing items. Hinako has health and sanity to keep track of. The sanity helps her focus to see incoming attacks from oncoming threats. Get the timing right, and Hinako performs a satisfying parry. When combat isn't nearby, the player will solve abstract puzzles where it's not always clear what exactly is being asked. The game stops and asks the player a riddle that may or may not make a whole lot of sense. Perhaps I could chalk this up to a cultural gap in places. So on the one hand, Silent Hill F is a harrowing story about a lot of complex themes. Hinako is a fascinating character for a multitude of reasons. The game ends up saying an awful lot. But on the other hand, it's also about a girl who can perfectly parry some monsters. It has some clunky boss fights. Easy puzzles sit next to opaque riddles. There's a lot of gameplay in it. Does Silent Hill F's extraneous gameplay get in the way of what it's trying to say? I also enjoyed Mixtape quite a bit. This is a narrative game about three friends on their last night together before one of them moves to New York City. They spend the story trying to score booze for a party, while reminiscing about the trials and triumphs of teenagerdom. I really dug this story. It's a fantastic coming-of-age tale that gets at some really interesting stuff. The titular mixtape is perfectly curated for a perfect night, but what happens when the plan falls apart? I related in some part to each of the characters. Stacy's fixation on planning every last thing, Cassandra's want to rebel but not being especially good at it, and Slater's laissez-faire attitude paired with his difficulty with opening up. Each sequence is paired with a song and a minigame. These range from skateboarding down a busy road, to taking photos with a crappy digital camera, to renting a movie while completely wasted. These sequences aren't especially complex. Mixtape doesn't have any branching story paths, so really these provide only the slightest bit of friction. No matter how much Slater trashes the blockbuster, the scene's outcome will be the same. But Mixtape does have a few standout scenes. A key scene involves the crew running through a field when suddenly they realize they can fly. The basic controls for locomotion suddenly do something unexpected. Another scene occurs when Stacy has a bad realization. She flies backwards, smashing into obstacles. These two scenes use interactivity to elevate the emotion of the moment. But when it comes to Mixtape being a game, well, there's not much to it. There are goals, but there's a 100% guarantee that the player will accomplish them, barring turning off the game never to return. In one of the skateboarding sequences, I collided with an obstacle, only for the game to rewind and let me try again. Does Mixtape's lack of gameplay enhance or take away from the experience? In a blog post that predates the term kill gameplay, Droqen outlined the dichotomy of a game being a toolkit to facilitate experiences and a game having a cost to play. Costs refer to tests of skill, difficulty, or time. A player will need to spend something in order to engage with an interactive work. A game's primary function is to facilitate play, to allow the users to have a, hopefully, meaningful experience. Now, costs aren't inherently bad, but they can get out of hand. Quote, "The difficulty may serve a purpose in the game design, driving the player towards more interesting lines of play. The playtime may be reflective of lots of interesting experiences that couldn't have fit a shorter game, but it's the direction and experiences that are valuable, not how hard it was or how long it took. Don't mistake the toll for the fairy or the signifier for the signified. What makes my players play? What makes it harder for them to play?" The idea of a cost is unique to games. If a player reaches an obstacle in a game, there is a chance that they will never overcome it. A user who has every intention of seeing a game to its conclusion might not get there. There's a sequence in Silent Hill F where Hinako is chased by a menacing fog that makes red weeds grow everywhere. She has to run down a trail to a gate. At this point in the story, it's becoming clear what the fog and weeds represent. Hinako has every reason to run, both literally and symbolically. If the player isn't fast enough, the weeds will grab Hinako and consume her. This resets the scene and the player will have to try again until they're able to make it to the gate. There's friction here. This is a test of skill, a cost. There's a similar sequence in Mixtape where Stacy runs through a neighborhood, jumping over fences and sliding through backyards. This is an important scene in the narrative. She's hit with a sudden determination to help her friend in need. There are obstacles in her way that the player has to either jump over or slide under. Hitting the right command will get her closer to her goal, but missing a command leads to the same outcome. Stacy will look clumsy, but she'll still make it where she needs to go. There is no way to fail this scene. This scene has no cost. Imagine for a minute that the way both of these scenes play were reversed. If the running scene in Mixtape had a real possibility of Stacy getting hurt, would that help or hinder the point the scene is trying to convey? If the player made it halfway through, fell, and then had to start the scene over, would Mixtape be improved? Honestly, I don't think so. Being in lockstep with Stacy is important for this sequence, and pulling the player out to make them perfect an auto-runner level would just take away from its emotional impact. The flip side of that, though, is that if this scene has no fail state, then the scene has no stakes. If it truly doesn't matter if Stacy clears all the obstacles, then it feels like the player, and by extension the character, has no agency. Conversely, if the chase scene in Silent Hill F was always winnable, then it wouldn't feel dangerous at all. The threat of failure, the threat of having to see that gross death animation, adds to the tension of the scene. In theory, the player should feel anxious, closer to the headspace of the player character. Although, I did get tangled in the weeds a few times. After a few retries, the scene stopped being scary. I stopped considering the symbolism and instead focused on finding the shortest route through the woods. Both of these scenes ask different things of their players, and thus cost different things to experience. The question is, do either of these games implement their cost in an effective way? Both games are great arguments both for and against gameplay, while also illustrating the shortcomings of either mindset. 3 poems in the End of Gameplay tackle the concept of capital G gameplay head-on. Paradoxically, these are my favorite in the whole anthology, and also the ones I kind of disdain. Let me explain. Gameplay Forever places the bunny in a randomly generated tower that presumably goes on infinitely. Little fruits act as collectibles, and poison squares serve as hindrances. The bunny climbs for as long as they can on this ramshackle level with floaty controls. There isn't a win state, it just goes until the player falls, which won't take long. Gameplay Killing resembles a precision platformer. The bunny finds himself in a corridor on fire and has to make it through. The text on the wall reads several permutations of, "How should I kill the bunny?" Colliding with a burning tile puts the bunny back at the start of the room, only to try and die again. Open Field places the bunny in a green expanse of grass and trees. The environment is uneven, mimicking nature. As the bunny hops onward, the trees grow more uniform, more regular. Regular trees, fertilized with ego, become parks, gardens, and zoos. Who could want gameplay, the game asks, as a meaningless score counter appears. I like the questions this triptych of poems raise. Why do we have a tendency to streamline and gamify experiences? Why do games tend to implement negative reinforcement? Why do we play games where the only way out is to lose or quit? Why is death such a common fail state? Death, the end of your life. To make it to the end of a burning cave? Why bother? But at the same time, they do show the limitations of the kill gameplay theory. In the case of Gameplay Forever, this endless tower is badly designed. It's bad on purpose, but it's still bad. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to what blocks appear where, which leads to impossible situations to climb through. Also, the controls are weird and floaty. In the case of Gameplay Killing, the precision platformer levels aren't laid out in especially interesting ways. I'm not sure if this hallway one is even possible to finish. Also, again, the controls. I find the words of Open Field to be rather meaningful, but there's more to games that feature exploration than a random score counter. The End of Gameplay gives the audience lackluster parodies of better games and asks why anyone would bother with them. My biggest problem with The End of Gameplay is that it draws attention to these issues, but doesn't offer any solutions. Games without ends are meaningless. Okay, is there a way to find meaning within it? Games use too much negative reinforcement. Well, how can we eliminate it and still have an engaging time? Why would someone knowingly opt in to more rules and limitations? Well, how should a designer go about giving the player more freedom? The End of Gameplay is a fire and brimstone sermon without an altar call. If we end up killing gameplay, what will be left? Of all the poems in The End of Gameplay, 3 stand out as potential answers to these questions. Swamp gives the player control over a little frog character. The frog hops on the ground while the narration draws attention to the platforms above. Wouldn't you rather be up here where it's dry? But there's no way to get up there. The frog is stuck on the ground. And then he falls into a hole. Getting out of the hole is such a pain in the ass. Like, the frog can jump and then kick off the wall, but then they're going the opposite way, and it's not high enough to chain together jumps. It took some experimentation. I know it looks like I'm having a Cuphead tutorial moment, but I promise this is weird. And then I fell into another hole. Ah! I interpret this sequence to be about desires being just out of reach. How they look tangible but aren't really. If you're looking up there, you're going to fall down here. The clunky controls gave me a feeling of being stuck. The ideal was communicated through gameplay. Romantic might be the best poem in the whole anthology. In it, the bunny is accompanied by a second bunny who receives the same inputs from the player, only on a slight delay. This makes it seem like the second bunny is following the first. Eventually, they enter a cave. The second bunny knows the way and shows us where to go. We do our best to follow. When we make it out, we're on either side of the screen. The player controls both bunnies simultaneously. They meet in the middle, enjoying the snow around them. The poem ends when the player moves the bunnies. They hop apart into the abyss, alone. I love this. It's such a short and sweet exploration that communicates ideas about togetherness through gameplay. Dream of Fire, though, I think is the most revealing piece of them all. The player is given control over the insect guy and is placed on the left side of the screen. On the right sits a burning house. The narration proclaims, "Of course I'm afraid of burning to death." The way the screen is set up makes it look like a platformer level. You're supposed to go to the right and avoid the fire, right? But getting over that first little block is extremely difficult. It might be impossible. What you're supposed to do is turn around and leave, to not engage. The original kill gameplay talk got derailed partway through when an audience member brought up Sudoku.
Alternatively, we've always had things like Sudoku or crossword, some stuff to keep the brain active. So I think when you're designing games, you just kind of have to decide, am I making a game point to express something? Like,
Do you think Sudoku expresses something, though?
No, it's just to keep you active.
Yeah, and I don't like it. I'm like, it doesn't mean, I don't know, like I feel like it's busy work. And like, let's say you get good at Sudoku. What the fuck do you do with that? Right? Like, just go to the page, just get someone to tell you, like, hey, like, you can express yourself in Sudoku. It makes you feel smarter, but it doesn't make you smarter. It creates the illusion of purpose.
I could be contrarian and point to studies about Sudoku and brain activity, but that would miss the point. Does art need to serve a utilitarian purpose? As I read it, the end of gameplay feels like a crisis, an attempt to see how games can be more than a series of challenges. But the flip side is bitter nihilism. I'm not sure if it's intentional, but that's the prevailing attitude I was left with after finishing the collection. Why go on a hike if you'll just loop back around to the trailhead? Why collect coins if there's nothing to spend them on? Why climb the tower if there's nothing at the top? Why fall in love if it will one day end? Why do anything? It's not enough to enjoy the journey or to feel the thrill of the hunt. There needs to be something more. We can't climb for nothing. There has to be a prize up there. You're better off just disengaging, to run away from the challenge, to hit escape and not bother with anything. We chase high scores, we enter situations we cannot win, we bang our heads against immense challenges, and for what? For the feeling of accomplishment? What did we actually accomplish? My least favorite poem in the end of gameplay is Contribution. In it, the bunny stands at an unfinished tower. Clouds hang in the sky. A doorway sits at the top of the screen. If we are to engage with the work, we should get up there somehow. The first screen has a fairly simple series of jumps. The second screen has one of those really tiny passageways the game loves to throw at you. Come on, just get in there. The third screen has this long vertical shaft that's crazy frustrating to climb with another one of those small holes. Making it up there sends the bunny free-falling down 2 screens, back to the tower's base. And it's like, I get it. It's yet another poem drawing attention to the meaninglessness of these digital quests, but simply raising the cost and asking the player why they paid the price, like, I don't know, joke's on me, I guess. The end of gameplay is fixated on the destination. Why did you fly to the top of the flower? Why did you stay in the dungeon for as long as you did? But it doesn't take into consideration that the act of engaging with the system can be satisfying. That it's okay if a game is just fun. The referee can lead the player to their own conclusions. But I get it. I really do. For as much as certain parts of the end of gameplay don't sit well with me personally, I think its broader point is a fascinating and worthwhile one. Gameplay exists to make the player behave a certain way. Within the boundaries of rules, a user will mold their behavior to be more in line with the point the developer is trying to make. Of course, not all games succeed at this, but that's the primary goal, from my perspective at least. I find games to be the most intimate medium because of this. And to be completely honest, I'm not sure if my interpretation of kill gameplay is the same as droqen's, but I like to think of it this way. Has a title's gameplay been implemented effectively? Do the game's mechanics help or hinder the broader points being made in the work? If it hinders, then, well, yeah, guess it's killing time. Awake didn't need a second level for it to make its point. Mixtape doesn't need a fail-state to tell its story. Silent Hill F needs a sense of danger to convey the emotion of a scene. I could point to a boatload of titles that use gameplay to tell stories, communicate ideas, and broaden viewpoints. Their respective costs are well worth it and facilitate exploration and play. But I also realize that these are outliers. I realize that pointing to a handful of indie games doesn't address the larger problem. In an industry where budgets balloon and expectations are high and titles are intended to be enjoyed by as wide of an audience as possible, it can feel like games have lost the artist's touch. When a work is envisioned as a product first and a piece of art second, the resulting experience can feel impersonal. A high cost for the sake of a high cost. Gameplay for the sake of gameplay. If a piece of art is impersonal, what's the point of it existing? Can a computer-generated Sudoku puzzle express anything? A total of 35 Dogma 95 films were produced. Outside of a select few, they by and large fell into obscurity. The movement officially ended in 2004. The grand ideas presented in those bright red pamphlets never became commonplace. No one who made a Dogma film ever made a second one. Thomas Vinterberg, the director of the first Dogma film, said upon reflection, "I think Dogma was inspiring for quite a few peoples and sort of started a digital movement. Personally, I found it extremely uplifting and fantastic making Dogma movies, but I felt I completed it with the celebration. I think that was the end of the road on Dogma for me. It was as far as I could go." But another reason Dogma 95 ended was because a lot of the films just weren't that good. Instead of using the limitations to get to the heart of what a film is, a good number of them ended up hiding behind the limitations. Of course this movie is nonsensical and looks bad. It's a Dogma film! But even if the official movement fizzled out, its spirit lives on. Plenty of low-budget films embrace the tenets of Dogma 95, either knowingly or not. You don't need a huge budget to tell a good story. Sometimes you just need a good story. Let that good story be a good story. The End of Gameplay is a fascinating work from a fascinating voice. I know I've said some critical things in this video, but I do recommend checking it out if you have any interest in challenging the interactive medium. There are many more sequences that I didn't mention, and even the ones that I kinda spoiled are more effective when experienced firsthand. Kill gameplay is a concept more people should be aware of, and I'd love to see a reality where gameplay is implemented with more intentionality. I don't foresee kill gameplay becoming a major movement, at least not in its current form. But like Dogma 95, I can see how many of its broader ideas could be useful. Does a work's high cost just add weight to an experience that it doesn't need? Can a low cost prevent a title from being as impactful as it could be? We should be asking what else games can be. What would games look like in a post-gameplay world? If we throw out all the conventions we've been taught, what new and exciting things will sprout in its place? But I still love gameplay. Always have, and I always will. I love tinkering with mechanics and exploring the possibilities of different systems a designer puts forward. How the boundaries of hard-coded rules can change the way a player thinks and behaves. Even in something mechanically sparse, the way gameplay is implemented can communicate ideas in a way other mediums can't. I know it's just an illusion. I know when I turn off the console, the game will end and I'll move on with my life. But it doesn't make the experiences I had any less valuable. Less can be more, but nothing cannot be anything. Long live gameplay.